What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today I want to discuss one of the most confusing cards ever printed. And the reason that I'm bringing this up now is because Dominaria United is going to include cards that were originally printed in Legends. If you're curious about that, Wizards actually put out a video talking all about the lost Legends that have been discovered that will be included in Dominaria United collector booster packs. Now, that's actually just a really cool thing for collectors in general, because there are those of us who will be able, well, though there are people who can afford collector boosters of Dominaria United who will be able to open pack fresh cards from 1994, I believe it was. That's just awesome. Like, it's just awesome that cards of that age are going to be available to us coming fresh out of packs. Very exciting, very cool. And one of those cards that people will be able to find is Chains of Mephistopheles. You will notice that wording on older cards is not the same as it is today. It's actually very different. And so let's look through the way that Chains of Mephistopheles was originally printed in Legends, and then I'm also going to discuss the Oracle text, and we're going to talk through how it works and how you might want to use it. So the way that it's worded on the card, it says every time a player draws a card, that player must first discard a card from his or her hand. If there are no cards in player's hand, take top card of library and place it in the graveyard instead of drawing. This enchantment does not apply to the first card drawn by a player during the draw phase. Now, if you have any clue what's going on there, I'm impressed. But the Oracle text is much cleaner, much more succinct. So let's read that. If a player would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, that player discards a card instead. If the player discards a card this way, or if the player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a card this way, they mill a card. So it is relatively simple in that what it's doing is it is hosing players who draw multiple cards in a turn. If one of your opponents has a Chains of Mephistopheles on the board and you draw you draw your card for turn, nothing happens. You don't need to worry about it. Keep going about your business. But if you cast, say, an Opt or a Thirst for Knowledge or any card that would result in you drawing additional cards, or any situation in which you would draw an additional card, instead you either loot or you rummage, where you discard a card, then draw a card. So as a result, you don't actually go up on cards at all. You don't gain card advantage. You're actually stunted in that regard. You cannot increase your hand size, which is a big frickin' deal, frankly. Now, you can use this to fill your graveyard if that's relevant. You can discard cards with flashback that you might be able to cast, those kinds of things. But it's still, you can't draw too many cards. You can't just draw a ton of cards. It's also important to note that Chains of Mephistopheles does this with every single draw. So if you cast a spell that has you draw 5 cards, you do this 5 times. It's not saying do this once and then resolve the rest of the spell. You do this for every single one of them. So if you do have a card in hand and you would draw a card off a spell or an ability, Chains of Mephistopheles triggers, you discard a card first, then you draw the card. If you have no cards in your hand, and therefore you can't discard a card, you just mill a card, and you don't draw anything. So Chains of Mephistopheles prevents your hand from growing. It's an incredibly powerful effect that it's bonkers, frankly. It's phenomenal, and it only costs 2 mana, 1 and a black. So that is why this card is worth so much. On top of that, it's only been printed in Legends. This has never been reprinted. And so as a result, supply is incredibly low, the effect is incredibly powerful, and it's super efficient. So you mix all those things together and you've got just a recipe for a primo collector's item. And so now, as a result, if you open a Chains of Mephistopheles in a Dominaria United collector booster pack, put that sucker in plastic immediately. To be honest, you might want to be wearing gloves when you open that pack, because if you get a Chains of Mephistopheles or a Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale or a Mana Drain from, like, there are some bomb cards in Legends that are going to be worth a ton, and this is definitely one of them. So It's incredible. It's very, very powerful. And like I said, the biggest thing it does is shut down card advantage. It prevents people from gaining card advantage. Now, this does include you. This is a symmetrical effect. It affects you as well. So if this is in your deck, you need to be aware of it. You need to be willing to tangle with that. I would highly recommend effects that can leverage the graveyard. Lean into graveyard synergies, really dive into them. Cards like Unburial Rites and big reanimator creatures are very important and excellent with Chains of Mephistopheles. Situations where you would be drawing and discarding become actually really good with Chains of Mephistopheles because, well, they become okay because you have to discard multiple cards in that situation, which can be rough. But again, if you're leveraging your graveyard to good effect, you can do some great things with it. So that's really the key. Make your graveyard work for you. Make sure that counts. If you're leveraging your graveyard and your opponents aren't, Chains of Mephistopheles just cuts them off at the knees and you can continue your plan. I would highly recommend, if this is in your deck, that you do have some cards that allow you to draw cards, but very few. And I would also recommend, despite what I said earlier, looting effects that have you draw then discard. I would actually be very careful with those, because in that situation, if you were to say tap a Merfolk Looter that just says draw a card, discard a card, Chains of Mephistopheles replaces the draw effect. So instead you discard a card, then draw a card, but then you discard a card again to satisfy the other Merfolk Looter condition. So it's if I'm understanding correctly, I believe that's how it works. So you'd actually have to just straight up draw one, discard two. That's not good. That's not ideal. So again, you need to be filling your graveyard with value to make that count. But in any event, that's Chains of Mephistopheles. I think this card is fascinating. It's incredible. It's weird. It's difficult to understand. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And if you enjoyed this video, if this was helpful for you, please hit that subscribe button. I do talk about confusing cards a lot around here. It's kind of my thing. One of my things, I should say. If that's of interest to you, I would love it if you wouldn't mind checking out some of the other videos that we have. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much.